Now, I seem to be in a role of dunking on videos that are several months old, and this one is 12 months old. But if you're watching and you stumble across some video that came out yesterday or whatever, and you think it would be good for me to dunk on it, send it to me, and then we can dunk on some more relevant videos. But I wanted to dunk on this video, which everyone I'm sure has already dunked on. But the reason I thought this was good is this features Colin Wright, who is one of the gender critical big brain thinkers, one of their best. And I was just kind of watching it to see, and it made me laugh out loud. So I've seen the first half, and let's just see what Colin Wright, gender critical activist and PragerU, the fake right wing propaganda university, has to say about biological sex.
Asked to define the word woman during her Supreme Court confirmation hearings in 2022, Judge Ketanji Jackson famously demurred, saying, "I'm not a biologist." Well, I am a biologist, and I'm here to help.
Oh, he's a biologist. PhD in evolutionary biology. Okay, so not in developmental biology, but okay, that's fine. So let's keep going.
To that end, let me rephrase the question to Judge Jackson. Are 6 categories in humans, male and female, real, immutable, and binary, or are they merely social constructs? Answer, real. That's just the way it is, and we all know it.
That's just the way it is. End of conversation. Common sense. Sorted. Enough said.
Immutable. It can't be changed. And binary. There are only 2 sexes, not 3 or 4.
Okay, so he's just asserting. It's okay to assert your argument at the start. Let's hear the justifications for these assertions, because that's what's important. Not just whether he's because we already know he's going to make this assertion.
Or 57. This is true throughout the plant and animal kingdoms. An organism's sex is defined by the type of gamete, sperm or ova, it can or would produce.
So, it's defined by the gamete that it can or would produce? What does that mean? How do you know what gamete someone would produce? I've argued with people like this before, and they say, well, if they're male, they would produce sperm, and if they were female, they'd produce ova. And then you're like, well, how do you know if they're male or female if they're not producing any gametes? And they're like, oh, if it weren't for if it weren't for a defect, then they, like, if it weren't for a defect, like if you were to change something, then they'll produce the other one. Like, if it weren't for some biological process, then you would have produced sperm. But if it weren't from a different biological process, you would have produced ova. It's like the classic, like, if I had wheels, I'd be a bike. Like, the fact is, or they would produce? They don't. They wouldn't produce any. That's literally the observable reality of their body. Some people do not have any gametes at all, from birth or at any point in their life.
Males have the function of producing sperm, or small gametes.
Some don't.
Males, ova, or large ones. There is no third gamete type. There are only 2. Therefore, sex is binary.
Obviously, that is false. If there is a property, even if, okay, let's just say gametes are binary. If, totally happy to concede that. That is a property of people, right? Which gametes you have. And if you have a binary property which applies to an entity, then that always results in a possibility of 4 categories, because there is always one, the other, both, or neither. And he tries to get around the neither category by just saying, oh yeah, but they would be one of the others if something was different. And like, okay, well, if which thing was different? If we change them in this way, they would be in one of the categories, and if we change them in the other way, they'd be in the other category. So that's completely meaningless. But also skips over the both. And in some animals, both is normal. But in some other animals, like humans, both isn't normal. It's very incredibly rare, but it's not unheard of. There are examples of humans who have had both types of gametes at the same time. So even if gametes are binary, that doesn't mean a human sex classification is binary. It means there are 4 groups at minimum. If you only look at one property. Of course, sex isn't just one property, because your sex characteristics include your chromosomes and your hormone levels and your gonads and your genitals. These are like, there's a bunch of other stuff. These are all part of what your sex is. Sorry. So he's saying it.
This shouldn't be controversial. It's just
It is controversial because it's wrong.
basic biology.
Basic biology, we said the catchphrase. Basic biology TM. Everyone do a shot.
Every one of us is the result of a male and a female, our biological mom and dad, successfully reproduced.
I also will point out, just because I'm being picky, but I mean the core issue of what he said so far we've covered. But also he did say throughout the whole of the animal and plant kingdom, but lots of some animals and some plants don't reproduce sexually, and some at some point previously in their evolutionary history reproduce sexually, and now they just don't. For example, there's a type of lizard where they all have ova and there's no sperm involved in anything anywhere, and it's totally fine to say that they're all female, but not that, I mean, humans are the result of this. There isn't any examples of humans there is that one famous one in the Bible which isn't true, but I suspect he thinks it's true. PragerU thinks it's true, but in real life we haven't had any examples of humans that. But just being extra picky here, that it doesn't apply to all plants and animals.
Producing. Sorry to make you think about that. Without the existence of males and
That was a joke. Well done.
females, I wouldn't be here right now, and neither would you. Our species would have gone extinct long ago.
Well, that's kind of why. I mean, it's not true, is it? Because there are plenty of species that don't have both. So no. Or that they only have things that are simultaneously male and female.
Many gender activists, however, falsely assert that sex cannot be binary and must be viewed as a spectrum because a very small number of people have genitalia that appear ambiguous or mixed.
So I'm not saying the word spectrum because I think spectrum is misleading. I'm saying bimodal distribution. Spectrum, I think, implies a single dimension, like the color spectrum, and it implies like the color spectrum, red becomes more orange until it becomes orange, and then it becomes more yellow, and so this could be like more red and this can be more green, and I don't think that's how a good way of representing sex. But anyway, he's now talking about genitals, which is interesting because according to his definition, it doesn't matter what genitals you have. If you're born with ovaries, internal ovaries, and a penis, then you are just a woman, according to him. So he believes some women have penises, of course. I'm sure he would say that and stick to that.
Yeah, that appear ambiguous or mixed, phenomena known as intersex conditions. These
Not all it. So there is a form of a subcategory of intersex, which is like ambiguous genitals. But that's not the only type of intersex. There's also like intersex people could be someone who, for example, has no gonads at all, and therefore doesn't fit into either of his sex categories. Oh, what happened there?
The existence of such conditions renders the categories male and female meaningless and must be viewed as a spectrum because a very small number of people have genitalia that appear ambiguous or mixed, phenomena known as intersex conditions. These ideologues claim the existence of such conditions.
Ideologues. You're on PragerU, mate.
Renders the categories male and female meaningless. But intersex conditions don't undermine.
That's not what we're arguing. Well, it's certainly not what I'm arguing or what anyone I've ever met has argued, that male and female is meaningless. That is a false dichotomy.
The sex binary at all, because sex ambiguity is not a third sex. The existence of very rare borderline cases no more raise questions about everyone else's sex than the existence of dawn and dusk casts doubt onto the existence of day and night. Our society.
This is what made me laugh when I was like, I have to do this video. He's just so good at self-owning himself in arguments like this. Oh my God. There's several examples of him doing this. So in this one, he's saying, in the same way intersex people are to male and female, which I am claiming is a binary, as dawn and dusk are to night and day, okay? Do you, Colin Wright, think that day and night is a binary. Like, what are you talking about? It's like, oh yeah, you know, there's a rare 1 in a million case when it's dawn or dusk, but other than that, it's like day, nighttime, instant change. Like, that's what a binary would be. If it was day or night, it would be day up until the very instant that it was no longer day, and then it would be night. That's the only way day and night could be a binary. And they're like, oh yeah, okay, I'll concede that there's dawn and dusk. So there's these like change states in between, but it's like, this is always day, and then there's this dawn bit, and then this is dusk bit, and then there's this, this is night, and that's still a binary. It's not a binary. If there's a transition state, then, I mean, you've just labeled 4 states, so that's a 4-state system, but actually, it's not day and then all of a sudden dusk. It's not like, this is a good example of a spectrum, day to night, because there's nowhere along the line between day and night where you can objectively declare that it is one or the other. I mean, you could say that the moment the sun goes below the horizon, that it is now nighttime. Or maybe that's when you say it's dusk. I mean, I don't even know. I couldn't even steelman this position. But then, like, if you're at sea level, if you're in a valley, that is still light at that moment. And, how tall is this person? It just makes no sense at all. Like, you're saying that 2 people who have the same longitude and latitude, if one of them's at the bottom of a skyscraper and one's at the top of the skyscraper, it like day and night is actually different for them, but it's still somehow a binary. Just complete nonsense. It's just so good that he compares this thing that he's trying to claim is a binary to something that is so trivially not a binary. And like I read this article by him where he's like, sex is a bit like flipping a coin. It either lands on heads or tails. Of course, sometimes it does land on the edge, but that doesn't count. I was just like, oh, it's just amazing. Like, why do you keep comparing your thing that you're claiming is binary to stuff that is just like famously not binary? That's just so good.
Society isn't experiencing a sudden dramatic surge in people born with ambiguous genitalia. We're experiencing a dramatic surge in people who are unambiguously one sex, claiming to identify as the opposite sex.
That's a very good graph there, very high quality. That's a PragerU classic. I can't say anything about the numbers of intersex people, to be honest. I don't know them off by heart. We are seeing more people coming out as trans, but some people are intersex and trans, and gender critical people always try and say, oh, okay, yeah, cool. Maybe you can find some exceptions. I may have declared that sex is immutable and binary as a core premise to my entire ideology, but you may have found an exception, and I will kind of concede that, but I'll never actually like go back and realize that my core premise is actually wrong. I would never accept that, but I will, just for the sake of this particular argument, back down, because I can't possibly argue against you, and say, yeah, okay, maybe some people don't fit into one of the 2 categories I've got artificially constructed, but that's not trans people, so it doesn't count. You're not allowed to talk about it anymore. Conversation over. But the thing is, if you're saying sex is binary, but actually there's some exceptions, so in society, what do we do with those exceptions? Well, maybe we let them choose, or maybe we just make doctors randomly assign them, or maybe we look at their other sex characteristics and see which ones of them are like on one side or the other, and then, treat them that way until they say otherwise or whatever. All possible options. We'll talk about the morality another time or later, but if you're willing to accept that there's that group, at least some of those will be trans. At least some of the trans people will be in that group. So are you saying that trans people aren't allowed to, describe themselves how best they see? Like, it doesn't matter what sex characteristics a trans person has at all, even if they've changed all of the relevant sex characteristics in their life, unless they were born intersex, and then you could have 2 people who are like biologically identical but somehow fit in different categories in this system. That's why they didn't want you to talk about intersex people, because they do not have answers for this at all. Their ideology they don't even have propaganda for this. They don't even have like apologetics for it.
Or something other than male or female altogether. Gender ideology seeks to portray sex as so incomprehensibly complex and multivariable that our traditional practice of classifying people as either male or female is grossly outdated and should be abandoned.
I mean, it is complicated, and there is multiple variables. That is just true.
Evolutionary concept of gender identity.
That doesn't mean that we should get rid of classifying people as male and female. It just means we should stop pretending it's an immutable binary, because it isn't.
System holds that males shouldn't be barred from female sports, women's prisons, or other spaces previously.
We talked about prisons earlier. Yeah, see, the thing is, like, this one I paused on here. So we've actually already talked about prisons in this episode. I'm not going to go back to it. But we have just mention on women's shelters here. The other core part of gender critical ideology. The first bit is sex is an immutable binary. That is observably false. Even when you try and use your crappy analogies to argue otherwise, gender criticals will, under pressure, concede that there are exceptions to their ideology, but then they just quickly hand-wave them away and that you're not allowed to ask questions or think about it. But that's part one of their ideology, and the other part is this immutable binary sex that I have accepted actually doesn't really work. That's what should be used for laws, and that's what should be used for deciding whether a rape victim should be allowed to go to a shelter or not. But actually, even if sex was binary and immutable, which it isn't, you would still need it to be the case that sex, this binary and immutable one, this magic essence that follows you around for your whole life, is the thing that is important when it comes to deciding who needs protection from sexism and sexual harassment and, rape shelters and stuff. And the reality is, which gender criticals will also concede under pressure, but then try and hand wave away, is that at least some trans people pass and are thus treated as the sex they've transitioned to in society, and thus will inevitably experience sexism targeted at the sex that they've transitioned to rather than their birth sex. So neither of the core gender critical claims are true. Neither of them stand up individually, and together they make no sense at all. And they need both things to be true. They need sex to be an immutable binary, and they need it to be the only thing that is used in law and society. And they're both wrong. They're both garbage. And they will individually concede they're both wrong. If you push a gender critical person hard enough, they will be like, oh, okay, yeah, there are exceptions to binary sex, but the exceptions don't count. That is them conceding that their core premise, number one, is false. And then later on, they'll say, oh, yeah, well, of course we should have laws making it illegal for trans people to have sex without telling the other person they're trans. How would that even be possible if it weren't for the fact that society was reading the trans person as the sex they've transitioned to? And if society reads you as the sex you've transitioned to, then you will experience sexism for that sex, and therefore society should protect you against it. And they will concede that because they need to concede that in order to argue for laws like rape by deception or whatever, the things when you kiss someone at the nightclub and then they say that you've sexually assaulted someone. So they even admit that both of their core essential premises are false, but they won't ever allow themselves or anyone to start extrapolating from them admitting those premises are false.
Is segregated so long as they identify as female. But intersex and transgender mean entirely different things.
They do, but some people are both.
Intersex people have...
Because these are both like properties of humans, and if we were to just simplify it down and say that being trans or being intersex were both binary things, so you're either trans or cis, or you're either intersex or not, which also isn't true. If that were the case, then there would be multiple categories of people, because when you have binary properties, on entities like we talked about earlier, you create multiple categories. So if you have trans or not, and you have intersex or not, then the combination of this is trans and intersex, just trans, just intersex, and neither. So then there's 4 different groups, right? So obviously, I mean, that is relevant. It is relevant to point this out, because if gender critical people are like, oh yeah, well, okay, our model doesn't really account for intersex people, and here's the special provision we've made for them, we're saying, so trans people who are intersex, you do accept, And how do you know which one's intersex? Because, I mean, like earlier, Colin Wright was saying that intersex people are born with ambiguous genitals. How do you know how ambiguous my genitals were at birth? Like,
extremely rare condition.
Also, that isn't the only intersex conditions. There are a whole bunch of other ones, and some of them are invisible, and sometimes people don't find out about their intersex condition well into their life, or even until after they die. So
that result in apparent sex ambiguity. Transgender people, however, aren't sexually ambiguous at all, but merely claim...
Well, that's obviously not true, because, like, a core... Well, I mean, sexually ambiguous, I would never use that term. But, like, again, this is what I was just saying. One of the things that gender-critical people are pushing for is the idea that trans people should have to out themselves in all situations, that their legal documents should have to out them. Why would that be necessary if you always knew who was trans? And so that means there must be people that you claim to believe are male, who you read as female, or people who you can't work out which one you're reading them as. That's inevitable reality of the core claims of gender-critical ideology.
To identify as something other than their biological sex. Once you're conscious of this distinction, you'll begin to notice that gender activists attempt to steer discussions away from, for example, whether men who identify as women should be allowed to compete in female sports, and toward prominent intersex athletes like South African runner Caster Semenya.
We're not doing any steering here, mate. That is completely nonsense. I will happily argue both in favor of trans girls being allowed to do PE at school, and also that Caster Semenya should not be forced to take hormones against her will, because they're both very easy positions to defend. What the issue is all your insane dickhead leaders like J.K. Rowling will see an intersex person and then start attacking them and calling them a man in the exact same way as when they see a trans person. So we're natural allies because you hate all of us, because your stupid ideology demands that both of our groups don't exist.
Why? Because so long as they've got you on your heels, making difficult judgment calls on individuals...
Yeah, that's why. Not because it's immoral to attack random cis women athletes just because they're intersex. Yeah. It's to get you on your toes. Oh, so difficult to respond to a trans act. Oh, they keep asking me questions and I don't know the answers. I just blindly believe what you say, Colin.
Medically complicated intersex conditions. They've succeeded in drawing your attention away from...
You said it weren't complicated earlier. What are you on about?
Making easy calls on unquestionably male athletes, like 2022 NCAA Division I women's swimming and diving champion Leah Thomas. They shift the focus to intersex to distract from transgender.
Well, in the last Olympics, I think it was actually J.K. Rowling and the anti-trans hate mob and the entire gender-critical movement. I don't know if it was Colin Wright personally or not, but it was the majority of the gender-critical movement who were absolutely shifting the gender-critical hate cannon directly, squarely onto two intersex women athletes and trying to ruin their lives. Because they believe this bullshit about binary sex, and they also believe they can always tell, and they also believe that they know everything about someone's internal and external sex characteristics just from looking at their face.
But the existence of a tiny handful of intersex cases is completely irrelevant to the issue of allowing males in female sports, prisons, and restrooms.
They always have to say tiny handful. They always really have to push it down because they know that it is actually a problem for their ideology. Like, he strongly said at the start, sex is binary, and he's like, oh yeah, but there's some examples, but there's not many. Like, even the low estimates of intersex people, like the low estimate the gender criticals push, which is obviously going to be lower than any realistic one, is still like millions of people worldwide. That's a lot of people.
Crafting policy to exclude males who identify as women, or trans women, from female-only spaces isn't complicated. That's because trans women are unambiguously male, and so the chances that a doctor incorrectly recorded their sex at birth...
Unambiguously male, apart from... Wait, what was that we were talking about earlier, where Nazi Mason, Lauren Boebert thought that some random cis woman was a trans woman? Like, what happens all the time? Like, just completely ridiculous. There are so many trans people who just move through society without having issues with being misgendered and stuff. And that doesn't devalue the ones that don't do that, or choose to not do that, or can't do that, or for whatever reason. It's just a fact that that is true for some trans people. And so this argument doesn't hold up?
Are essentially zero. Therefore, any transgender policy designed to protect female spaces need only specify that participants must have been recorded female on their original birth certificates. Or, if no birth certificate listing sex is available, biology, not an individual's feelings.
What biology? What we doing? Like the one we just looked at earlier from Trump says what gamete you were set to produce at conception, which isn't even something you can get from conception, but also we're not at conception right now. You can't see what it was at conception. Like, what are you talking about?
Will determine whether the participant would be allowed to compete as a male or female. Crafting effective intersex policies is more complicated, but a much less pressing issue for protecting.
It should be trivial. If sex was binary and immutable, and it was the only thing that we should be using for classifying people, the two gender critical pillars, sex is immutable born binary, and sex is the only thing we should be using for law and society, then it's trivial, right? We just easily classify everyone as male or female, and then we just enforce that on them. All the people that J.K. Rowling has decided is a man, all those black women athletes, they're just all men now. They might have grown up as girls and, experienced misogynistic sexual harassment their entire lives and see themselves as women and be married to people who see them as women and are actually women. But if the gender critical movement has decided that they're men, they are just men now. It's not complicated. Why is that complicated? The only way it'd be complicated is either if you're conceding that sex isn't binary and immutable, or if you're conceding that someone's sex isn't the be and end all of which law and society social categories they should be in.
The integrity of women's sports. Individual organizations can decide for themselves which criteria should be used to keep female spaces safe and, in the context of sport, safe and fair. It is imperative, however, that such policies be rooted in properties of the body and not one's identity, because identity is not germane to issues of fairness and safety.
That would definitely be if it was actually implemented, it would backfire for gender critical people. It also wouldn't be ideal for all trans people. But if you were to either say, well, we're trying to stop sexism, or we're trying to categorize people by body parts, either of those two is going to end up including some trans women and excluding some cis women. Like, that's just inevitable. The only way you could ever get what gender criticals wanted is if you had some I don't care about science, I don't care about biology, I don't care about sexism lunatic in charge, which is exactly what they've got at the moment with Donald Trump. As soon as you start caring about those things, you're going to have to face up to the reality that sex isn't binary and that trans women do experience misogyny.
You can identify as anything you like, but your identity does not determine biological reality. And the reality is that sex in humans...
Just like Colin Wright can identify as someone who's got a binary, immutable definition of sex when he hasn't. Yeah, good stuff.
Is immutable PhD in evolutionary biology and fellow...
I just made the one joke. Oh my God, I'm so sorry. Oh dear. I identify as Colin Wright.
For the Manhattan Institute for Prager University. Thank you for watching this video. To keep Prager...
Embarrassing. My goodness. Like, this is their best. The best guys go on and say things like, sex is like night and day. And also, yeah, there might be some exceptions, but it's still really easy. But yeah, it might actually be complicated. But it doesn't matter because we should just be doing it based on reality. But not the reality of trans people experiencing the world how they actually experience it. Yeah, just total garbage. How are people falling for this? It's just so garbage. I mean, the reason people are falling for it is because PragerU has more money than you can even imagine, and they are dealing out the propaganda. People encounter more items of anti-trans propaganda than they do trans people, and so people buy into it. I'm going to do a dislike. Oh, I can't because I'm not signed in. All right, get started. Anyway, I hope you enjoyed that, and I hope you learned something. Sex isn't binary, and if you disagree, if you're gender critical and you're like, okay, Colin Wright isn't our best, sex is binary, just write it in the comments. Just explain, because there will be gender critical. I'm not gonna delete any of the comments saying this. There will be gender critical people in the comments saying sex is binary and immutable, and then there will be people in the replies saying, okay, then what is it? What is the definition of sex? Can you tell me how to create this binary? And then there'll be this long drawn out thread where they just try and dodge it. They try and avoid giving any concrete definition. And then after days, they'll finally concede that, okay, not everyone fits into one or two categories, but it doesn't matter because trans people aren't intersex. Like, and then in the next video, they'll claim that sex is binary again because they're dishonest and cultist.